أعزائي المشاهدين متابعين قناة المراغين زي ما وعدناكم. احنا النهارده اهو في مكان بتاع سحر، محل من محلات السحر هنا في كلويس كاليفورنيا. المكان اسمه ذا اوبن اي. هنخش للساحر صاحبه وهنشوف هو بيعمل ايه جوه، وهنعمل معاه حوار طويل قوي، فخليكم معايا. هنروح تقرير، هنخش جوه نوريكم المنظر جوه ونديكم تقرير، وبعد كده هنعمل مقابلة مع الشيخ روبرت. انتظرونا، ما تروحوش اي حتة.
أول ما جيت أمريكا كان ليا سلفة، إنما إيه، ما عندهاش لا مبادئ ولا دين ولا أخلاق. هرتني أعمال سفلية، وكان الموضوع صدمة بالنسبة لي. كلنا كبرنا وإحنا فاكرين إن الأمريكان ناس عمليين، وإن الجن والعفاريت بيلبسونا إحنا بس طلعت المشكلة دولية، ولقيت الجن والعفاريت وصلوا لقلب المجتمع الأمريكي، ولقيتني برضه بتعملني أعمال هنا وكان لازم أفكها. سألت واللي يسأل ما يتوهش، والقدر جابني في سكة الشيخ روبرت. زي عندنا بالظبط، الراجل ده كله بركات، وبيجيله مريدين من كل أنحاء الدنيا. علمني كل أسرار السحر الغربي، ووراني قد إيه التشابه بين البشر ومعتقداتهم. تعالوا نشوف الشيخ روبرت هيقول لنا إيه.
أعزائي المشاهدين متابعين قناة المراغين، زي ما وعدناكم النهاردة عندنا مقابلة في المكان اللي وريناها لكم مع صاحب المكان ده، مع الشيخ روبرت. شيخ روبرت، Sheikh is a name actually in Arabic for a highly respected magician. I would like to welcome you to our channel, and the audience is really looking forward, and I have so many questions for you. If you want to have a label, what label you can have?
Well, thank you for having me. Labels are kind of problematic for magicians because we don't want to put ourselves in a tiny box, right? And being able to work magic means you have to constantly be expanding your view of reality. And as soon as you label something, you limit it. It's why I believe that ancient religions didn't believe in worshiping idols, because that limits God. And we don't want to do that, right? So I prefer to use a label depending upon what I'm doing. So if I am doing very formal, rigid structures of magic, then I call myself a ceremonial magician. If I am directly helping other people in the unique way that I do that, I call myself a thought worker, because in this country, a lot of people who are trying to help people spiritually call themselves light workers. And that has some problematic connotations too, and it's not very specific to what I do. So it changes depending upon what I'm doing.
So what is the definition of thought worker?
To me, a thought worker is somebody who helps people change their thoughts. I do that through tarot reading, when I read cards for somebody and present their current situation in a different perspective. That changes their thought. When people come in here and talk about their spiritual problems or their magical needs, by redefining things and letting people come up with new definitions, sometimes the understanding and the proper naming and defining of a problem solves it all by itself. Other times it's more mystical action, where if somebody needs it, I will actually help them insert a thought into their own minds so that it overrides thoughts that are preventing them from being successful.
So are you claiming that you can change people's thoughts?
If they let me.
So they have to give you permission to do it?
Pretty much. I would think there'd be an exception there if it's something they really, really want to do, but just can't do it, and then they wouldn't know where the change thought came from. You could probably do it for somebody. But what you couldn't do is change somebody's perspective against their will. So I could not think about somebody and change their religious perspective. I could not change their worldview. But if they thought themselves as being lazy and they didn't want to be lazy anymore, that might not require as much permission to do.
So they have to be willing to change in order for any spells or any work to take effect.
Yes, at least the way I do it, yes.
Now we would like to know how you got started with magical and spiritual practice, and if you, where did you learn all, or you got all your knowledge from?
The start was one of those serendipitous things that just happens that change people's lives. I had a friend in junior high school who moved away and then 4 years later moved back. And right after he moved back, he says, "Bob, I have something to tell you. When I was gone, I became a wizard." And I immediately disbelieved him. And I just said like 2 or 3 words of disbelief. And he said, "Well, fine. I just thought you've been a good friend. You should know." And then I immediately had 2 thoughts. The first one was, if he was lying to me, he would have worked harder. And the second one was, if he's right, I can find out if God exists. And I've never looked back. That's been my whole goal, is to uncover a relationship with the divine ever since. As far as being taught, I taught myself very poorly in the beginning. I was terrified of everything I did. I thought I was going to accidentally raise a demon. But after a while, that went away, and then I became a founding member of a lodge here in Fresno that practiced under the system of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And so I had a teacher there. He prefers not to be named. I was introduced to somebody named Lon Milo Duquette, who runs an organization called the OTO and has a lot of books, and I learned from him. I learned from all the people in that lodge, both friend and foe. Everybody teaches everything to everybody is kind of the way that works. And then just through life experiencing and never giving up and keep practicing.
So we would like to know first, what did you mean by a wizard?
I'm not sure what he was. He never told me what tradition he came from, but a wizard is a type of magic user. I do know, and nobody believes me when I tell them this, that at a very young age, if I was loosely holding my car keys in my hand, he could pull them out of my hand. And they would just drop to the floor. They wouldn't float across the room to him. But that's when I realized that magical power was real. It has a physical effect. And so what he was, I don't know to this day.
So you believe that he did this through changing your thoughts?
No, he works totally different than I work. I just happen to specialize in thoughts. He did something with his subtle bodies, his astral body, if you will, and was able to work mind over matter in some way.
So in magic, you can get in so many other different levels and different practice.
Yes, there's lots of different ways to practice magic.
What about the kind you practice? You mentioned the Golden Dawn. So you guys still meet and do your ceremonies?
Not anymore. We disbanded probably in early 2001, 2002, in that range, maybe a little bit later. But the practice continues. The Golden Dawn system is about dismantling everything that gets in your way. So it basically takes apart your entire personality and shows you an image of who you are and the negative things you attach to and the negative behaviors you attach to, and then you decide how to remedy those situations. So it's a spiritual development system as much as it is a way of practice magic. You can practice magic without any spirituality to it at all, or you can emphasize the spiritual part. And in my opinion, I way overemphasize the spiritual part of it. To me, it's all about manifesting my highest soul on earth.
So what is the benefit from this practice? Is it like is it something between you and your divine, or It was something to help you helping others, or what is like your what you get out of this pretty much?
Well, one of the things I got out of it was expanding my universe. Is I realized there is a God, there are other gods, there are spirits, there are subtle aspects of being human and having a human experience that I would not be privy to if I didn't do this. And everything we do eventually helps somebody else, even if we don't intend it to, or even if it looks very negative. The universe hasn't been created. It's constantly being created. And therefore, everything we do is a learning experience for ourselves or someone else. And all we have to do is learn whatever that lesson is, change our vibration so that that lesson becomes a positive thing in our lives and other lives, and continue from there. So it's never something that harms anybody, at least for the long term. So there's a great benefit in understanding that the universe and the divine is truly a perfect place. It just feels like it's not sometimes. It's hard to say that if you've just been in a car accident or you've just been assaulted in some way or some other negative thing happens. But if you take a really long-term view, everything is about our growth towards the divine. And just knowing that is a huge benefit.
Now, I would like to ask you, what is the biggest misconceptions about your guys' practice?
Oh, the biggest misconceptions, like from the general public, is that we're all fooling ourselves, that this doesn't work. And I understand that because the human mind, at least in this era, especially in the West, tries to make the universe rational. It tries to make everything make sense. Well, all you have to do is look at the news and realize this worth doesn't make any sense. The things that we do to each other are insane. They're just obviously counterproductive to what we're doing. And so when magic happens, the non-magician sees simply a coincidence or a way to explain something away. And I'll give you an example of that. I knew a fellow once who was able to go unseen. He wasn't invisible. You just wouldn't notice he was there unless he wanted you to know. So he walks into his boss's office, and his boss is looking at him through the doorway. He walks in, sits down in the chair, and his boss never moves. And he sits there for 5 minutes. Boss never says a thing. Finally, he clears his throat, and his boss goes, "Oh, I was checking my email." Well, his email was over there, not where he was looking. So his mind had to rationalize how this person suddenly appeared. And that's why normal people, if you will, don't believe magic is real, because they immediately rationalize what they see so that things make sense to them. As far as practice goes, the common misconception is fear is not of the divine, right? And you'll see this written over and over again, that this thing is not the divine or that thing is not the divine. And that's just misplaced idealism, I think, because if the divine is all things and fear exists, fear must be part of the divine process, right? I think what they're really trying to get at is you can transcend past that level. You can go beyond your fear and have real connections with divine beings. But fear is there. It's part of the process. It's one of the barriers we have to overcome to become spiritual people or magicians or yogis or whatever the case may be.
You think that's why we as human get so scared when we speak about spirits or ghosts or dead people?
Oh, yeah, because we want to pretend we have control. We don't have a whole lot of control. And that loss of control is why people are afraid of spirits, because they don't know how to interact with a spirit. It's in a strange way, it's kind of analogous to racism or nationalism or anything else, is that thing over there is foreign to us. We don't understand it. Therefore, we must be afraid. And I think that applies to spirits as well, because people don't understand what an angel is, what a gnome is, or an air elemental is, a genie is. They don't know, and since they don't know, they're afraid.
Okay, and yeah, I would love to get into this with details. Let's say I am a beginner and I know nothing about magic, and I would like to start practicing myself. What advice you gonna give me, and how you think I should be starting with?
Well, I think the first piece of advice would be to learn how to meditate. Focusing your mind on what you want to do is really important. Removing distractions is really important. And there's a thing called discursive meditation. Meditation is merely being aware of your mind and what it's doing. So meditation is often looking at a candle burning, and you can allow thoughts like, this is hot, flame, movement, red candle, wax, candle holder. But as soon as you start drifting off and say, well, red means stop sign, and oh, that means I have to drive somewhere, and what's going to happen, once you start getting out there, you're not meditating anymore. So it's that a moment of awareness where you bring yourself back and focus on candle, flame. That trains your mind to remain focused on what you want to focus on. It trains your mind to not be carried away by fear, because fear is a distraction. And it allows you to be more responsive to the things that happen in life, because you're not merely reacting to them. And we all do. I've meditated for years. I still react to things. I still react inappropriately to things. I just catch myself a little bit sooner than I used to. So that practice of being able to focus your mind is really important. In Western magics, the other thing I'd say is look at the patterns in your life. There are patterns everywhere. And you will notice that when you're around certain people, you feel bad. When you're around other people, you feel good. When you are around a person and another person comes in, the conversation tilts and it turns, and it becomes either more or less than it was. So by paying attention, you can find out what contributes to your life and your spiritual practices and what distracts from them. And I do that with all of my behaviors, so that when I do something and it makes me feel closer to the divine, I try to do more of that. And when it makes me feel further away, I try to do less of that. And the way you can do that is by recognizing the pattern, to say, when Mo comes over, we have great conversations, and I get new ideas about my spiritual practice, so I want to spend more time around Mo. When another person comes in and they are here for reasons of power and control and what I view as more negative things, that kind of makes me question why I'm here. Because I'm not here to assist in that sort of behavior, right? And so when I start questioning why I'm here, that can lead to interference in the other things I'm supposed to do while I'm in my shop. So I do my best to interrupt that pattern and push those people away until they learn, or maybe I can change their mind in some way to get them focused on growth rather than destruction. So it's really about life patterns that matter, and what distracts you and what enhances you.
That's very interesting. When you've been talking about meditation practice and how you focus on one thing and try to clear your mind, this is very similar to, for example, what Muslim does as far as praying 5 times a day, or Coptics that go to church and light a candle and pray to Jesus or Virgin Mary. What is the similarity and what is the difference between these religious practice and meditation?
Well, I'm not a religious scholar, but there's a subtle difference between the two. One is devotion to a deity. For instance, Catholics will pray to the Virgin Mary, and they pray to Christ, and they pray to the saints. That is very analogous to what a lot of magicians do, in that we understand there's various classifications of spirits that can help us, that can bring things to our lives or remove things from our lives. But when a religious person does it, they are on the hyper end of the scale of forming a relationship. So what they're trying to do is to pray to Christ to such a level that Christ enters them and teaches them. And just by the feeling of being around the deity, that they learn something and they grow and they form this bond with that which they love so much, right? And I believe praying 5 times a day, as a Muslim would do, would accomplish the same thing. Generally speaking, there's a devotion to divinity, right? And their spiritual growth comes through that devotion and how that devotion is returned. There's a concept in Kabbalah, which comes from Jewish mysticism and magic, of an oterikon, which is a word that means other things, basically. And to them, Amen means God is our faithful king. And it implies a two-way relationship. God is our king, but he's also faithful to us. And that relationship, I think, is what's happening during prayer and candle lighting and that sort of thing. Meditation takes that same level of devotion, but removes everything so that there's literally no human concept between oneself and the divine. So the connection is made without any social rules attached to it. It's made without any dogma attached to it, without any restrictions attached to it. So you receive what your individual soul is meant to receive from it, as opposed to more of a general cultural thing. And then there's this huge area between those points that I think all these practices overlap. From what I've talked with you and my practices, we might be thousands of miles apart culturally, but the practices, they're pretty much the same or very similar to it.
Back to how you start. Do you think like some people are born to be magicians and some don't?
I think it's like anything else. People have a natural talent for things. When it comes to magic, I never thought I had a natural talent except for being very persistent. I can do the same thing wrong 20,000 times until I get it right. And that's kind of my talent. I'm obsessively persistent at things. There's other people I know that at a very young age could do all kinds of magics that I couldn't do, and I might even have trouble doing now. So I think it's not, well, let me take that back. Yeah, some people are meant to be magicians or witches or wizards or whatever it is that you want to call them, the same way some people are meant to be artists or teachers or interviewers or whatever the case is. We all contribute in our own way. The trick is to find out what makes your soul sing in this life. And you'll know that when you get a sense of euphoria, or at least I do. There are times when somebody comes in here and I say the exact right thing with the exact right words to reach that mind and to give them the key to the solution to their problem that they sought when they were coming in. And when that happens, I don't know when I did it. But as soon as they walk out the door, I feel excited, I feel euphoric, I'm bouncing off the walls, I am thrilled, I am happy, and I know, oh, I just connected somebody to some message from the divine they wanted to hear. And that's why I'm here. That's why I do what I do, is to foster that connection. And people who are meant to be wizards or magicians foster other types of connections. And that's okay too. Nobody has the right answer. We just have our answer and the way we can contribute.
Earlier, we spoke about divine. What's your definition of divine, and what you mean by we divine?
Well, those are kind of two different. That word's a synonym for two different things. So, by divine, I mean God, that thing that perpetually creates. Those things that are as close to that which perpetually creates. And I try not to name it God or goddess or anything like that, because it is nameless, it is formless, it is perfection in and of itself. And divine things are things that are very close to that which creates. Archangels, angels, things that are wholly perfect as they sit right now are divine. As far as the other term, to divine, that is divination. That is trying to figure out what the divine wants, where the energy of somebody's life's going. It's kind of akin to fortune telling in a way. So that's a matter of crossing the worlds to gain information that you can bring back and share with somebody. So that's like reading tarot cards or runes or tea leaves or coffee cups or whatever the case may be.
You mentioned before the interview speaking about the 3 A's. What do you mean by that?
So the 3 A's are something that I came up with to explain the process of spiritual evolution, or the way in which I explore, and it's been helpful to some other people. So the first A is acceptance. Whenever you pray, or whenever you do magic, or whenever you want to connect with something larger than you, you have to accept the possibility that the universe is listening to you. If you pray to Christ or to that which creates or whatever, you have to accept and really accept you're being listened to. When you ask the universe for something to appear in your life, you have to accept the universe is listening and is capable of bringing that to you. If you don't have that acceptance at the beginning, nothing's going to happen, because you're basically saying, I don't believe in you, but help me anyway. And that doesn't make any sense. So you have to accept. The second thing is pay attention. So the second A is attention. And attention is looking at the universe and see how it responds to what you ask for. So if I were to do magic and say, bring me more customers into my store, they might not just walk in the door. What might happen is somebody says, hey, I want to do this interview with you and broadcast it to these 12,000 people in Egypt, and then all of a sudden they start sharing with their friends back here, and it gets closer and more customers come into the store. So it's not always this direct manifestation of something. You have to pay attention to what the universe offers you in response to your magic or your prayer, and then act accordingly. So if I ask for more friends to come into my life, and then I start getting invited to parties, it's incumbent on me to pay attention that that's the universe responding to my magic. Now it's incumbent upon me to actually go to the party. So you have to pay attention to the way the universe is speaking with you. And it does that in a wide variety of ways. We could talk about that all day long. And the last one is awareness. We have to be aware of our new reality. So if I say, I want to understand how magic in my ceremonial magic matches with some other practice of magic like hoodoo, that is a uniquely American form of magic, then once I see the connection, I have to practice both at the same time, so that when I use my ceremonial magic and realize, oh, there's a way that fits into hoodoo that manifests things in a uniquely American way, I now practice with a new awareness, right? I'm not just from my ceremonial point of view, I live by the mixture of the 2 points of view. And that's the same with religion. One of the things that I recently learned is the divine is telling me to dress differently. I dress like a typical American, t-shirt and jeans and maybe a button-down shirt, and I started to wear the kurta. And as an American, when I started to try to, where do I buy a kurta? You know, who sells these things? I had to start reading about them. And as I read about them, I learned that part of the length of the kurta is for male modesty. And as an American, that blew me away because our perspective of Islam is very anti-female. It's the woman who has to be modest. It's the woman who has to cover herself up for whatever reason. And all of a sudden I've just learned, well, wait a minute. It's not a gender thing. Men are expected to be modest as well, right? So now I have to live with that new awareness. I have to understand that modesty is a cultural concept that transcends my narrow point of view, right? I can never go back and say, well, Islam is anti-woman because they make women cover up, right? I have to say, well, wait a minute, it's pro-modesty. So you have to live with a new awareness of whatever you live with, right? And whatever you learn has to become part of you. You can't just gain knowledge and then reject it because it contradicts the way you used to live. You have to live in a new awareness. So to me, that's the process. You have to accept, you have to pay attention to the universe, and then you have to live in a constant state of new awareness as you learn things. And to me, that's a very spiritual process because by doing that, we can understand how to get closer to the divine. An example I use with that is, sometimes Christians come into the store and I ask, during the conversation, I say the one thing that I've never understood about Christianity is the focus on sin and the constant prayer to be forgiven. Why don't Christians pray to Christ to be more Christ-like so they don't need to be forgiven, right? And when you do that, when you experience Christ as real, as a divine presence, as a perfect being, then you're not going to need a whole lot of this other stuff, right? Because now you have this relationship. You have a new awareness of what it is to be Christian, right? And that's the awareness I try to bring, is a way of changing people's minds to think about things just differently enough that allows them to grow rather than being stuck in that little corner.
So you believe anybody with any belief or any religion can practice magic?
Oh, yeah. Magic is not a religious thing. It is either a spiritual practice like I practice it, or it is, a mechanical process where it's a form of prayer without divinity to it, I guess. But anybody of any culture practices magic. There are cultural things across all cultures that are magical. We celebrate birthdays and blow out birthday candles. Well, before that, we make a wish, right? That's a little magical practice. I have never known anybody to go through life without at least once saying, God, if you just get me out of this, I'll never do it again, right? That's a form of prayer, but it's a form of magic, because if you notice, when you say that, most of the time God gets you out of the situation, right? So that's a magical practice in and of itself. And it goes across all cultures in all ways. To me, the divine's a huge part of practice, but it's not for everybody. Some people are just trying to make sure their cow doesn't get sick. And that's what they're doing. They're doing very practical magic. And that's okay too.
So why you think some religions is against the magic period?
I think they say that. I'm not sure that's true. For instance, in our deep south, it's a very conservative Christian mindset. And they would tell you, don't believe in any magic. It's not true. It's ungodly. But there's people called two-headed doctors. They're a preacher at Sunday, and they practice hoodoo, which is a form of magic, the other 7 days of the week. And you go to them for both purposes. There's the Catholics who tell you, oh, don't practice magic. But if you've ever gone to a Catholic mass, those folks are ceremonial magicians. You can feel the energy change when you're in a mass, and you can watch their ceremonial way in which they create that energy change. I think we're told not to do magic because that takes power away from the priests. That takes power away from the people who want to control you and want to make sure you're tithing and want to make sure you come to church on Sundays, all a form of control. Magic users are notoriously difficult to control because we don't see the world the way everybody else does. We don't see a need to be obedient to the rules of another human being. We see a need to be obedient to the divine energy that goes through us. And those things don't always match. And it's the fear that we're uncontrollable is why a lot of people discourage the use of getting into magic.
So you believe mosques and the churches and temples are made for this reason?
No, I just think human beings sometimes misinterpret what's really going on there. For example, I don't think the Catholic Mass is for Catholics. It's a touchstone. It's a place to go to. It's a place to feel the energy that is Catholicism, right? But I really think what's going on there is the priest is sending this energy out through the congregation and watching it bounce back to him. And what he's looking for is the next priest. He's looking to continue the line of people who can do the rites that are associated with his religion. So as he puts out that energy and he sees people responding in certain ways, then he approaches them or they approach him and they get this idea of having a calling to become a priest. I think that's what a Catholic service is for. I can't speak to a Muslim service or a Coptic service. I've never even witnessed one. But I think all those services have at its core a way of preserving the sacred teachings of religion in a way that's acceptable to society. And it's something I just learned. And it has to do with the wearing of hats. When we experience divine energy, the really high vibration divine energy, it comes through our heads, right? So when we're praying a lot or we're doing magic a lot, we can make this connection to this energy. And it's very electric and it's very frenetic. We just kind of bounce with it. And it can be very disconcerting if it's not channeled properly. And you can see this in America. We have a section of Christianity called the Holy Rollers, and they will speak in tongues, which is like this gibberish that they say is divine language, but no linguist can tell you that's an actual language, right? What's happening, there's all that energy is pouring through them, and it has to be expressed. It has to come out, and it's coming out in these chaotic ways. Well, there's a lot of religions out there who say proper piety means you're wearing a hat when you pray. You have to cover your head when you pray. And some of them, you have to cover your head at all times. Well, I started wearing a kufi on occasion because it goes with, the kurta and all that. And what I realized is when that frenetic energy hits, when you wear a hat, it's a filter, something happens, and it calms it down and it focuses. So you have this religious dogma that you have to wear a hat, which really doesn't make any sense from a modern perspective, but all these religions follow it. Well, they're preserving that tradition for the mystics in their religion to understand, oh, wait a minute, I wear this hat so that my mystical knowledge can be transmitted throughout my body and onto others. It's not a social thing. It's not saying if I don't have my head covered, I'm a bad person. It's a tool that we can use. And so a lot of religious dogma is there to preserve knowledge that other mystical people or other holy people can use to return back to that same religion and give back what they've learned.
That's really interesting what you said about the hat, and because that's exactly what Muslims wear in the Middle East, and where they go to the Friday prayer, they just wear one that is kind of longer, but it can't reach the ground, and they have to wear a hat as well. So that's really interesting. What's your definition of spirits, and how do you contact them, if any?
That's a complicated question. I think there's a lot of classes of spirits. So broadly speaking, a spirit is something that doesn't have a corporal, physical body that we can understand as one. And I think a lot of that has to do with our understanding of energy and different levels of being. So if you start at the top, there's angels or archangels, if you want to go higher. These are direct representatives of that which creates, and they are wholly perfect in and of themselves, and they're designed to do a specific job or set of jobs. Michael is a protector. Raphael is a physician and a communicator, and they're perfect at the jobs that they do. So that's the highest level of spirit. And then as the energy slows down, they become more and more fallible like a human is, where they can misperceive or they're selfish or whatever the case may be, right? But they can also be as beautiful as humans are, compassionate and loving and saving and all these good things. And then as it decreases, it starts splitting into more and more distinct groups. So you can have spirits that manipulate physical things like air, fire, and water, and earth, and are very comfortable in elementary environments that are predominantly within their element. And you can break it down to what some people call demons, which when you get to the worst of the worst demons, they just destroy things because they can. There's really no purpose, right? And then there's a little bit higher up who sometimes they want to help, but they don't know how, so they're fractured, kind of like a crazy human. They try to help, but they make things worse, right? And then there's others that pretend to be that, who are really deceitful, who will help in limiting ways. For instance, there's one that is supposed to be able to help you understand divinity, right? So what happens with that particular one is he might expand your notions of all these different religions, right? And so you're learning and learning. He makes it very easy to learn all that. But what you don't realize is he's building a ceiling over your head so you can never go up, right? Or the other way around. He's putting you on this pedestal so you rise higher and higher towards the divine, but he's building you this tower and you can't see past your windows, right? So there's a wide variety of spirits out there, and you would call them depending upon what you're looking for, and experience kind of tells you which ones. I stay away from the unruly ones at this point in my life because I think they're as counterproductive as they are productive. Why bother, right? As far as how to contact them, the Western way is through either a lot of ceremony, like you do in a Golden Dawn tradition, or what we call Solomonic magic, which is a lot of magic circles. You write divine names all around you. You create this environment that's really conducive to the spirit you're trying to call. Oftentimes those are angels. They're in the Abrahamic pantheon of beings, if you will. But it's really formal and structured and very religious and very pious in what you're doing. Then there's other folks who do it merely by forming a relationship with a spirit, by knowing there's a hoodoo spirit known as a road opener, something who makes your transition to other places easier. And they simply make offerings of whiskey under the name of that particular spirit over and over and over and over and over again until the spirit recognizes them and is willing to work with them. So it goes from very formal procedures to much like a cocktail party where you're just being very nice and very kind and hoping to gain the favor of a spirit that's willing to help you do the magic that you want to do.
So you can use anything pretty much to contact the spirits. Depend on the spirits and the spirit itself.
With a little bit of knowledge, what you're doing. For instance, if I was trying to form a relationship with an angel, I'm not going to leave out whiskey, right? I'm going to burn frankincense and myrrh and other very pleasing smells is basically what I'm going to do with an angel, or I might be writing its name in Hebrew. But if I am working hoodoo, which is a practice that I don't do, so I don't take this is the way hoodoo people do it, but I might write the spirit's name using Spanish, and my appeals to him or her might be done in Spanish because that's the language of the spirit. So while you can use a wide variety of things to contact the spirit, you need to know the nature of the spirit you're contacting and how to appeal to that particular spirit, because they're all different. They're just like people. Different ways of appealing, working for different spirits.
We spoke about what kind of magic you practice. You mentioned the Golden Dawn. Do you practice any other kind of magic?
Yes, but it kind of defies description. I do practice the kind of the dogmatic form of what Kabbalah teaches, and Kabbalah is a big part of the Golden Dawn. So there's a four-world system of emanatization where things start off as the pure divine, and then they slow down to a very fiery world, and then a watery world, and an airy world, and an earthy world. And so there's some kind of dogmatic worldview, and I'm very comfortable in that worldview, and I will use it. There are certain techniques the Golden Dawn teaches about how to rise through those various planes of existence. I will do that. But my magic now is much more personal. I have a relationship with what I refer to as my angel, and I will sit in my easy chair and simply have a conversation with my angel and ask it to continually teach me or ask it to teach me specific things. And then I receive knowledge in that way, and I work really hard to apply that knowledge to my life and to continually change myself so that I allow more and more of the divine energy into me. And that angel is really helpful in that regard. If I'm doing physical magic, for instance, I want new friends, or I want a change of job, or somebody else wants these things, then I have a tendency to rely on herbs and candles, and I borrow from my Golden Dawn tradition, but I work in a much more tangible way. So my style is now kind of my own, and I kind of look at it that way. All magical practices in schools and all religions are a starting point. They're a beginning. There's something that you can at least pretend to know the rules with. And as you work really hard and devote yourself to your religion, and I think this is true of any religion at all, you use the tools the religion gives you, you hyper-focus on those tools, and you hyper-focus on the relationship with the divine as you see it. And as time goes on, both the tools and the religion fades because you no longer need man's rules and you no longer need props and aids to get you there. You have a full-on relationship with the divine and you communicate directly. And I think that's the best way to approach things, is to use tools that you're given, use tools you're taught, until you eventually transcend them.